They told me to sit alone in the corner at my sister's wedding, but then a man came up to the table and whispered, "Pretend that you're with me. Your sister will soon regret what she said today." She was left speechless. Before we continue, don't forget to write in the comments which country you're from and how old you are. Enjoy listening. The ballroom was a masterpiece of elegance, a shimmering tableau of wealth and celebration. Crystal chandeliers hung like constellations, casting prismatic light across tables adorned with white roses and golden candelabras. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the hum of a string quartet, their notes weaving through the laughter and clinking glasses of Clara's wedding guests. The venue was a palace of perfection, every detail meticulously curated to reflect my sister's vision of her perfect day. Golden ribbons draped the chairs, and the dance floor gleamed under the soft glow of ambient lighting, alive with couples swaying to the music. It was the kind of wedding that demanded awe, the kind that Clara had always dreamed of, and I, Eleanor, was banished to the shadows. My table was tucked into the farthest corner of the room, half hidden behind a towering floral arrangement that seemed designed to erase my presence. My navy blue dress, chosen at Clara's insistence, was deliberately plain, a muted contrast to the pastel gowns and sequined elegance that swirled around me. "Eleanor, you don't want to upstage the bride," she'd said that morning in the bridal suite, her voice sharp as she adjusted her veil in front of a gilded mirror. Her eyes had flicked over me, assessing, dismissing. "Just sit quietly and don't draw attention. This is my day." Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Clara had always been the sun in our family's orbit, beautiful, magnetic, and unapologetically commanding. Growing up, I was the quiet sister, the one who faded into the background while Clara dazzled. Our parents, gone now for 6 years after a tragic car accident, had adored her, their praise for her beauty and ambition a constant refrain. I'd learned early to stay out of her way, to be the one who didn't make waves. Even James, her fiancé, now her husband, seemed to exist in her glow, his quiet devotion never challenging her sharp edges or the way she wielded her charm like a blade. So, I did as she asked. I took my seat at the corner table, surrounded by distant cousins and family friends who barely acknowledged me, their conversations buzzing like a radio I couldn't tune into. I sipped my water, my eyes tracing the celebration from the sidelines. Clara was radiant in her white gown, a vision of lace and tulle that seemed to float as she moved from table to table, basking in the adoration of her guests. Her laughter rang out, clear and bright, a sound that had always drawn people to her. James followed, his smile warm but slightly strained, as if he knew his role was to complement her perfection. I watched them, a familiar ache settling in my chest. I envied her ease, her ability to command a room, but more than that, I felt the weight of being invisible. Always the afterthought, always the one left behind. That's when he appeared. A man approached my table, his presence cutting through the haze of my solitude like a sudden gust of wind. He was tall, with dark hair swept back and eyes that held a quiet intensity, as if they were guarding a secret too heavy to share. His charcoal gray suit was impeccably tailored, the fabric catching the light with a subtle sheen, but there was something about him, a roughness beneath a polish, a sense of purpose that set him apart from the polished crowd. He moved with a confidence that bordered on audacity, pulling out the chair beside mine and sitting down without invitation. Before I could react, he leaned in, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered, "Pretend that you're with me. Your sister will soon regret what she said today." My heart stopped. The words hung in the air, heavy with promise or menace. I turned to look at him, my pulse racing. His face was close, too close, and his expression was unreadable, a mix of determination and something else I couldn't place. Amusement? Anger? A flicker of pain? I glanced at Clara across the room, still laughing with her guests, oblivious to the stranger at my side. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. He smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips that sent a shiver down my spine. "Call me Daniel," he said, his voice low and smooth, like velvet with a hidden edge. "And don't worry, Eleanor. Just follow my lead." My breath caught. He knew my name. I was certain we'd never met. His face, striking as it was with its sharp jawline and piercing eyes, wasn't one I'd forget. But there was no time to question him. He stood, offering his hand with a confidence that made it seem like he belonged here, like he was meant to be at my side. "Dance with me," he said, his tone leaving little room for refusal. I hesitated, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and intrigue. Was this a prank? A mistake? The cousins at my table were staring now, their chatter stilled, their eyes flicking between me and this mysterious man. Across the room, Clara was still caught up in her own world, but I could feel the weight of her earlier words pressing down on me. "Sit quietly, and don't draw attention." For once, I wanted to defy her. I wanted to be seen. I took Daniel's hand. The dance floor was a sea of motion, couples twirling to the lilting strains of a waltz. Daniel's hand was steady on my waist, his grip firm but not forceful, and his eyes never left mine as he guided me through the steps. I wasn't a dancer. My childhood had been spent with books, not ballrooms. But he made it effortless, his movements fluid and sure, as if he'd done this 1,000 times. The world seemed to narrow to just the two of us, the music and laughter fading into a distant hum. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the strings. "Because someone needs to remind Clara that she's not the center of the universe," he said, his tone light but laced with something darker, something that hinted at a grudge held tightly. "And because I know what it's like to be pushed aside." His words hit me like a punch. I'd spent my life in Clara's shadow, always the afterthought, the one who didn't matter. Every family dinner, every school event, every moment of our shared history had been dominated by her light. But how did he know? And what did he mean about Clara regretting her words? Before I could press him, he spun me gently, drawing the eyes of nearby guests. I caught Clara's gaze from across the room. Her smile faltered, just for a moment, as she noticed me dancing with this stranger. Her eyes narrowed, and I felt a thrill of defiance mixed with unease. What game was I stepping into? The song ended, and Daniel led me back to the table, his hand lingering on mine for a moment longer than necessary. "Keep smiling," he murmured, his voice low and conspiratorial. "She's watching." Sure enough, Clara's eyes were still on us, her expression unreadable but tense. James leaned over to whisper something to her, and she nodded, her gaze flicking back to me. The cousins at my table were whispering now, their curiosity palpable. "Who's your friend, Eleanor?" One of them, a second cousin named Lydia, asked, her tone dripping with intrigue. "Oh, just someone I met," I said, forcing a casual smile. Daniel chuckled beside me, playing along, but his eyes never left mine. There was a game being played here, one I didn't fully understand, but I was starting to enjoy the power of it, the power of being seen. As the evening wore on, Daniel stayed by my side, charming the other guests with an ease that made me both envious and suspicious. He told stories of travels abroad, wandering through the Louvre at dusk, sipping wine in a Tuscan vineyard, bartering in a bustling Marrakesh market. But he revealed little about himself. His answers were vague, his past a carefully guarded mystery. "Oh, I've been around," he'd say with a laugh when pressed, but his eyes told a different story, one of loss or betrayal, or something he wasn't ready to share. Every so often, he'd lean in and whisper instructions. "Laugh now," or "Look at her when you take a sip of your drink." It was subtle, calculated, designed to unsettle Clara. And it was working. By the time the speeches began, Clara's composure was visibly fraying. She stood to give her toast, her voice bright but strained, her hands gripping the microphone a little too tightly. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she said, her eyes scanning the room, lingering on me for a fraction of a second too long. "This day means so much to me and James, and to my sister, Eleanor." She paused, her gaze landing on me, then on Daniel. "Well, I'm just glad you could make it." The room laughed politely, but I felt the barb. It was classic Clara, sweet on the surface, sharp underneath, a reminder of my place in her world. Daniel's hand brushed mine under the table, a silent reassurance. "She's rattled," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Good." I wanted to ask him what his plan was, what he meant by making Clara regret her words, but the moment passed as James took the microphone, launching into a gushing speech about Clara's beauty, her grace, her perfection. The guests clapped, but I watched Clara, trying to see her through Daniel's eyes. She was beautiful, yes, but there was a hardness to her I'd always excused, a sharpness in her smile, a calculating glint in her eyes that I'd chalked up to ambition. Tonight, I couldn't unsee it. Dinner was served, a lavish spread of roasted duck, truffle risotto, and delicate petit fours, but I barely tasted it. My mind was on Daniel, on his cryptic words and the way he seemed to know exactly how to push Clara's buttons. He was charming the table now, telling a story about a near miss with a pickpocket in Rome, his voice animated, his hands gesturing with practiced ease. The cousins laughed, hanging on his every word, but I noticed how he deflected questions about his work, his family, his life. "Oh, I'm just a wanderer," he'd say, his smile disarming, but his eyes held a shadow I couldn't ignore. As the plates were cleared, Clara made her way to our table, her smile tight and her eyes cold. "Eleanor," she said, her voice syrupy but laced with tension. "I see you've made a friend." "This is Daniel," I said, my tone neutral but my heart pounding. "He's been keeping me company." Clara's eyes flicked to Daniel, assessing him like a predator sizing up a threat. "How nice," she said, but there was an edge to her voice, a crack in her perfect facade. "I didn't realize you knew anyone here, Eleanor." Daniel smiled, unfazed, his gaze steady. "Oh, Eleanor's full of surprises," he said, his tone light but laced with something that made Clara's smile falter. "It's a beautiful wedding, Clara. You must be so proud." She nodded, but her eyes were like ice. "Thank you," she said, then turned to me, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Eleanor, can I speak with you for a moment?" I glanced at Daniel, who gave me a subtle nod, his expression unreadable. "Sure," I said, standing to follow her. We stepped into a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the crowd, where the music was a faint hum. Clara's smile vanished the moment we were alone, her face a mask of barely contained anger. "Who is that man?" she demanded, her voice low and sharp. "And why is he acting like he knows you?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "He seems to know you." Clara's eyes widened, just for a moment, before she regained her composure. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, her voice trembling slightly. "Just stay out of trouble, Eleanor. This is my day, and I won't let you ruin it." She turned and walked away, her gown trailing behind her like a queen's robe, but I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched into fists. For the first time, I saw her not as my untouchable sister, but as someone who was afraid. And that fear sparked something in me, a curiosity, a defiance, a need to know what she was hiding. Back at the table, Daniel was waiting, his expression calm but his eyes alert. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice low. "She's worried," I said, my voice steadier now. "She doesn't like you." "Good," he said, his smile returning, sharp and knowing. "That means we're getting somewhere." The night wore on, the music growing louder, the guests growing looser with wine. Daniel and I danced again, and this time I felt the eyes of the room on us. Clara was watching, her smile fixed, but her eyes burning with something I couldn't quite name. Anger, fear, or maybe both. I wondered what she saw when she looked at me now. Her quiet, forgettable sister, suddenly the center of attention with a man she didn't know. For the first time, I felt a flicker of power, a sense that I was no longer just a spectator in her story. As the cake cutting approached, Daniel's demeanor shifted. He grew quieter, his eyes scanning the room with a new intensity, as if he were waiting for a signal. The air around him felt charged, like the moment before a storm. "It's time," he said suddenly, standing and guiding me toward the edge of the ballroom, where a small hallway led to the venue's private rooms. My heart raced as we slipped away from the crowd, the noise of the reception fading behind us. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of excitement and dread. "You'll see," he said, his tone cryptic but firm. We stopped outside a door marked private. He knocked twice, a deliberate rhythm, and the door opened to reveal a woman I didn't recognize. She was older, perhaps in her late 50s, with sharp features and graying hair pulled into a tight bun. Her eyes were piercing, and she carried herself with the air of someone who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. There was a quiet strength to her, but also a weariness, as if she'd been carrying a burden for years. "Eleanor, this is Margaret," Daniel said, his voice steady. "She has something to show you." Margaret handed me a thick folder, her expression unreadable but her eyes intense. "Open it," she said, her voice low and commanding. My hands trembled as I flipped it open. Inside were photographs, letters, and documents, all centered on Clara. My eyes widened as I scanned them. Bank statements showing large, unexplained transfers to offshore accounts. Emails discussing a deal with someone named R, and grainy photos of Clara meeting a man in a dimly lit parking lot, a briefcase changing hands. There were contracts, too, with Clara's signature, outlining agreements that made my stomach churn, deals that hinted at fraud, manipulation, and betrayal. One document caught my eye. A memo detailing a corporate takeover that had left hundreds of employees jobless, with Clara's name tied to the profits. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking, my mind struggling to process the scale of what I was seeing. "Proof," Daniel said, his voice low and steady, but with a fire behind it. "Your sister's been hiding things. From James. From you. From everyone." I looked at him, my mind reeling. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice sharper now. "How do you know all this?" He exchanged a glance with Margaret before answering, his expression tightening. "I used to work for Clara's company," he said, his voice measured but heavy with suppressed emotion. "She was my boss, brilliant, ruthless, and willing to do anything to get ahead. I was her assistant, her right hand, until I got too close to her secrets. She fired me, ruined my reputation, made sure I'd never work in the industry again. Margaret was her accountant. She saw the numbers, the lies. Clara destroyed her too." Margaret nodded, her lips tight, her eyes burning with a quiet anger. "I tried to warn people," she said, her voice steady but laced with bitterness. "I found discrepancies in the books, transfers that didn't add up. When I questioned her, she fabricated evidence against me, claimed I was embezzling. I lost my career, my savings, everything. Daniel and I have been waiting for the right moment to expose her. Tonight's that moment." I stared at the documents, my heart pounding. The sister I'd known, or thought I'd known, was unraveling before my eyes. Clara had always been ambitious, but this was a different kind of ruthlessness. a betrayal that cut deeper than her dismissive words ever could. But there was something else in the folder, something that made my blood run cold. A letter addressed to me, written in Clara's looping handwriting. It was dated 6 years ago, just after our parents' death. Eleanor, I'm sorry. I had to make choices to protect us. You'll never understand, but I did what I had to do. The letter was vague, its words heavy with guilt but lacking context. Paired with the other documents, it painted a damning picture. Clara had been involved in something shady, something that had funded her lavish lifestyle, her sprawling apartment, her perfect wedding, her untouchable aura. I thought of the years I'd spent scraping by, working long hours at a dead-end job while Clara lived in luxury. Had she built her empire on lies, on betrayal? Had she used our parents' death as a stepping stone? I looked at Daniel, my voice barely a whisper. What do we do with this? He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who'd waited years for this moment. We show the world. We returned to the ballroom just as the reception was reaching its peak. The cake cutting was underway, Clara and James standing together, smiling for the cameras, their hands intertwined as they sliced into the towering confection. But Clara's eyes kept darting to our table, her smile faltering each time she saw me with Daniel. He handed me a small device, a USB drive, its surface cool against my palm. This has everything, he said, his voice low and urgent. When you're ready, plug it into the projector. The slideshow's about to start. My hands trembled as I held the drive. This was my sister, my only family. Despite everything, a part of me still loved her, still remembered the rare moments when she'd been kind, when we'd been sisters instead of rivals. But the weight of her words, her dismissal, her years of pushing me aside, pressed down on me. I thought of the letter, of the secrets she'd kept. I thought of Daniel's whisper. Your sister will soon regret what she said today. The slideshow began, a montage of Clara and James's love story, romantic vacations in Santorini, candid moments in Central Park, their engagement photos under a cherry blossom tree. The guests cooed and clapped, their faces glowing with wine and sentiment. I slipped to the back of the room, where the projector was set up, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. I glanced at Daniel, who stood nearby, his expression unyielding, his eyes locked on mine. Margaret was there too, her face a mask of quiet determination. I plugged in the USB drive. The screen flickered, and the first image appeared. Not a photo of Clara and James, but one of the documents from the folder. A bank statement, with Clara's name in bold, showing a transfer of $500,000 to an offshore account. The room fell silent, the music seeming to fade into a distant hum. Another image followed, an email from Clara to R, discussing a cut of profits from a deal that had bankrupted a small company. Then a photo of Clara in that parking lot, handing a briefcase to a man in a trench coat, his face obscured but his posture tense. The guests gasped, their whispers growing into a murmur. Clara's face went pale, her eyes wide with horror. James looked at her, his smile gone, replaced by confusion and betrayal. The slideshow continued, each image more damning than the last. Contracts, receipts, proof of Clara's double life. A memo detailing her role in a corporate scandal that had cost hundreds of jobs. A letter to an investor promising returns that never materialized. A photo of Clara laughing at a gala the same night she'd signed a deal that ruined lives. "Turn it off!" Clara shouted, her voice breaking, raw with panic. She rushed toward the projector, her gown tangling around her legs, but the guests were already standing, some pulling out their phones to record, others whispering furiously. James grabbed her arm, his face a mask of shock. "Clara, what is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling. She didn't answer. Her eyes found mine across the room, and for the first time, I saw something I'd never seen in her before. Fear. Not just fear, but regret, raw and unguarded. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was speechless, just as the thumbnail had promised. The room erupted into chaos. Guests were leaving, some in a hurry, others lingering to gossip, their voices a cacophony of shock and speculation. James was shouting now, demanding answers Clara couldn't give. I stood frozen, the USB drive still in my hand, as Daniel and Margaret appeared at my side. "You did it, Eleanor," Daniel said, his voice low but triumphant. "She'll never forget this day." I nodded, but my chest was tight with conflicting emotions. Triumph, guilt, fear. I'd exposed my sister, shattered her perfect world. But at what cost? What did this mean for us, for the family we'd once been? I looked at Clara, now surrounded by a small crowd of concerned guests, her perfect wedding in ruins. Her eyes met mine again, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the sister I'd once known, the one who'd held my hand at our parents' funeral, who'd promised we'd always have each other. "Let's go," Margaret said, her voice firm but not unkind. "You don't need to see the rest." They guided me out of the ballroom, into the cool night air. The stars were bright above, indifferent to the chaos I'd left behind. I clutched the folder to my chest, its weight both a burden and a liberation. Clara's secrets were out, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen, not as her shadow, but as Eleanor, someone who could stand on her own. But as we walked away, questions lingered, heavy and unresolved. Who was Daniel, really? How had he and Margaret gathered this evidence? And what else did they know? The folder in my hands felt like a Pandora's box, its contents only the beginning of a much larger story. I thought of Clara's letter, her cryptic apology, and wondered what choices she'd made to protect us. Had she been protecting me or herself? "Where do we go from here?" I asked, my voice trembling, the night air cold against my skin. Daniel looked at me, his eyes softening for the first time, a flicker of something human breaking through his guarded facade. "Now, you live your life, Eleanor," he said, "not in her shadow, but in your own light." I nodded, but my mind was racing. The night was far from over, and my story, my real story, was just beginning. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint sound of sirens, growing closer, and a chill ran through me. Clara's secrets were bigger than I'd imagined, and I had a feeling I'd only scratched the surface. As we disappeared into the night, the folder heavy in my hands, I realized one thing for certain. I wasn't the invisible sister anymore, and whatever came next, I was ready to face it,